The wind off the God's Eye carried a damp, heavy chill, as if the lake itself disapproved of the company it kept. Harrenhal's towers loomed black in the night, jagged teeth against the moon. Robb Stark stood in the courtyard, cloak furred and fastened with the dire wolf's head, his breath curling into the cold air. The war council had ended with mutters and dissent, but no one dared challenge him openly now. "They say Harren's curse kills every man who holds it," Lord Mage Mormont said at his side, her voice low. "Perhaps it's time the curse had nothing left to cling to." The boy king didn't answer. His gray eyes were fixed on the weirwood branch he'd ordered, brought from the godswood of Riverrun, stripped of leaves, bound in soaked cloth, smeared with oil. To the river lords, it was just firewood. To the north, it was the heart's blood of their faith. Around them, the northern host moved in grim silence. Buckets of pitch were rolled into the hall. The old kitchens were stuffed with kindling. Every beam of wood, every scrap of canvas, every rotted roof in Harrenhal's vast sprawl was doused. Not one southerner among them lifted a hand. This was a northern task. Rose Bolton arrived late, as always, pale and unreadable. "A costly gesture, Your Grace," he said, voice as smooth as a drawn blade. "Harrenhal could serve us well." Robb didn't turn. "It served no man well," he replied. "I'll not leave a throne for ghosts to squabble over." At the center of the yard, they laid the bodies of the dead, Northern and Riverlander both, stripped of armor, wrapped in cloaks. They had fallen in battles Robb had won, but they'd rotted in this cursed place far from home. It was for them, he told himself, not for him. A single torch was brought forward. Robb took it, its flame licking the night. For a moment he thought of Winterfell's godswood, the carved face in the weirwood staring with eyes red as blood. He thought of his father, of Bran and Rickon, of the snows that would soon cover the north. When he spoke, his voice carried, "In the name of the first men, in the sight of the old gods, I give this place back to the dead. Let no king sit here. Let no man profit from this ground. Let fire be its last master." He touched the torch to the oil-soaked cloth. The flame leapt like a hungry animal. A roar followed, wood catching, pitch bubbling, towers wreathed in orange. The air grew hot and thick, carrying the stench of burning flesh from the funeral pyres. Some of the river lords looked away, faces pale. Others stared as if they were seeing the North's true face for the first time. By morning, Harrenhal was shrouded in smoke. Its towers still stood, blacker than before, but everything that lived within was ash. The stories began before the fires cooled, of a boy king who burned a castle to salt the ground with ghosts, who offered stone and flesh alike to the gods of his ancestors. The Lannisters called it barbarism. The phrase whispered of madness. And in the deep north, some said the old gods had heard him and marked him for it. The smoke hung over the God's Eye for 3 days. Even from the river, bargemen could see it, a thick, gray pillar curling toward the sky like some funeral banner for the south to read. In Riverrun's solar, the Tully lords argued in low, bitter voices. Lord Edmure had ridden hard from the fords to hear the news, arriving still spattered in mud. "You've put fire to a castle that might have housed 500 men-at-arms," he told Robb. "We fight for every stone in the Riverlands, and you've made ashes of the greatest of them." Robb kept his temper, though he could feel it fray. "We fight for the living, Uncle. Harrenhal's stones have never saved a soul. Ask the Wents. Ask every man who ever died in its dungeons." Edmure turned to Catelyn for support, but she stood silent at the window, her eyes fixed on the black plume in the distance. "I remember coming here as a girl," she said softly. "My father told me Harrenhal was cursed, and that wise men stayed away from it. The North remembers such things, the South, less so." Later, in the quiet of the yard, she came to him, alone. "Your father would have thought twice before denying the River Lords a stronghold," she said. "My father never saw Harrenhal with his own eyes," Robb replied. "He never heard the things I've heard in those halls at night." She studied him a long while, as if searching for the boy who'd left Winterfell. "Do not let the war make you a stranger to me, Robb." The first real crack in his alliance came within the fortnight. Lord Vance and Sir Carol Vance withdrew their companies from Robb's host, claiming they were needed to defend their own lands. The truth spread quicker than any raven. The River Lords believed the Northern King cared nothing for their holdings. Roose Bolton, ever courteous, offered his counsel. "Your Grace, perhaps a gesture to soothe them. A victory would serve, or gold, or—" He let the word hang. Pale lips curved in the faintest smile. "A wedding." Robb ignored it. Instead, he sent word to reinforce the Brackens against the latest Lannister foray. The Brackens had little love for him, but they hated the Blackwoods more, and war made strange bedfellows. Still, the rumors began to shift. Lannister gold bought many tongues, and they wagged freely. Robb Stark, the boy king who burned what he could not hold. The wolf who scorched the riverlands as eagerly as the lions did. North of the Neck, the news carried differently. In White Harbor, Wyman Manderley toasted the act, calling it a cleansing worthy of the first men. At Deepwood Motte, Lady Glover spoke of Robb as the first Stark in generations to honor the old gods with such a sacrifice. Some of his men began to wear ash-blackened charms, bits of wood said to be from Harrenhal's burning halls, tied to leather cords. They called them Wolf's talismans, to ward off southern treachery, but the one who watched most closely was Roose Bolton. The burning had unsettled the River Lords, but it had also given Robb an aura, not just a king, but a king feared. Bolton measured that fear, wondering if it could be turned. Fear was a blade with two edges, and he knew how to make it slip. The seeds of Harrenhal's ashes would take root in unexpected soil. The Lannisters moved faster than crows. Within days, songs began to drift across the fords, rough, mocking. Tunes the sellswords loved. In one, a boy king fed a castle to the fire like a child breaking a toy. In another, the smoke over the god's eye was called the wolf's banner, black as his heart. Drunk men sang them with grins. Sober men listened and did not argue. That was the worst of it. Lies did not need to be believed to do their work. They only needed to be repeated. At River Run, Edmure's hall filled with the hum of angry river lords. Each with a cousin dead, a field burned, a levy stretched thin. Lord Piper spoke with a red face and a voice that shook. "We bled to win those towers. If the North would melt our victories to slag, what use is your crown to us?" Lord Bracken, who had no love for Pipers or Starks, nodded anyway. "The boy thinks fire is cheaper than garrisons," he said. "It is not." Edmure tried for calm, but calm only makes a man look weak when fear sits at table. "The castle was cursed ground," he told them. "My nephew meant to deny the lions a roost by the god's eye. If Tywin had set Harrenhal as his seat, every raid we make would be answered tenfold." "Aye," said old Lord Vance, "but now Tywin says he fights not a king, but a terror. The Bay, Riverlands get burned either way." He looked tired more than angry, which stung worse. "Your Grace, we need walls. We need grain. We need men who will hold a stone rather than light it." When Robb entered, the rumble stilled. He had always been good at that without trying. He spoke plain without flourish, the way his father had. "I will not rule by fear alone," he said. "I did what I did at Harrenhal because I would not leave a poisoned throne behind us. I will pay the Riverlands back in victories, not in ash." "Victories?" Lord Blackwood said from the shadows of a pillar where his ravens waited in their wicker cages. "Then give us one soon, your grace, or give us our sons back." That night, Catelyn found Robb in the godswood with a candle guttering in a small cup of tallow. The faintest red leaf pressed in his palm like a prayer. "They will forgive you when you win," she said. "They will not forgive you if you lose." He smiled without warmth. That is true of everything. Rose Bolton came, to him the next morning, with quiet eyes and a neat, bloodless smile. "Your Grace, you need a noise that drowns their songs. Send me west with a swift hand and a silent one. Let me peel men from the Lannisters as a man peels skin. I'll leave their villages standing if that is your wish. But their captains and sheriffs? I'll keep them busy remembering pain." Robb hated how reasonable it sounded. "I want prisoners," he said. "I want names. I want letters read in Lannisport that turn fathers against sons. No massacres of small folk, no cruelty to children or wives." "We are not the lions." "As you command," Bolton said and bowed. "The Dreadfort knows many ways to make men talk without raising a scream. The quiet knife, the soft word, the promise of light. We shall be gentle." There was something in the word gentle that made Robb's stomach turn. Still, he signed the orders. Bolton departed with a picked force of quiet men in pale leathers who did not drink and did not sing. The other lords were relieved to see them go and could not explain why. In the camps, the wolf's talismans spread. Men wore blackened splinters around their necks and rubbed them before sleep. Some whispered a new oath before battle, not to the Seven or to R'hllor, but to the nameless old things in the trees. Let our enemies choke on their own pride as Harren choked on his. When Catelyn heard it, it sounded like the North teaching the Riverlands a prayer in a language the river could not speak. She did not say so aloud. The first word from Bolton came by Raven, a neat strip of parchment bound with plain twine. 3 Lannister outriders taken alive near Pink Maiden, then turned back to their camp with coin and a letter in each boot promising pardon if they deserted before the moon waned. "Men who dream of gold do not dream of glory," Bolton wrote. "They die less bravely." A week later, a second raven. 2 petty lords in the west had failed to come when called by their liege. They were ill, the message said. No blood, no boasting, just a slow quieting of the enemy's edges. Edmure heard of it and scowled. "If Rose Bolton unravels the west, they will call him savior," he told Catelyn in a low voice. "And if he fails, they will say I urged mercy, and the North answered with knives anyway. Either way, I sit under the rain." Far to the south, in a tent drenched in the smell of oranges and oiled leather, Tywin Lannister read the same ravens and said nothing for a long time. Finally, he told his captains, "Bolton is a leech. He fattens on war and weak kings. Feed him and he will grow. Starve him and he will seek blood elsewhere." Then he looked at his map, tapped 2 fingers on a crossing near the Twins, and smiled the way a man smiles when he sees a bridge he can buy. The phrase had already been whispering. Walder Frey was a man who felt slights the way other men felt cold. The burning of Harrenhal gave him new language for old irritations. "See how the boy treats great houses," he told his brood at supper, chewing slow. "He treats stone the way he treats oaths. Burns what he does not like and calls it piety." Some laughed. Some watched his mouth rather than his eyes. In the Riverlands, small folk began to speak of omens. A cow birthed a calf with soot in its lungs. A fishwife swore black flakes fell from a clear sky and melted on her tongue like snow. At night, the god's eye sometimes showed a glow where no boats sailed. Men who feared Lannister swords now feared something else as well, the North's patience thinning to a thread. Robb marched regardless. He took 2 Lannister foraging parties. Near Tumblestone in the space of a day, sent the prisoners home stripped of their boots and their pride, and left sacks of barley on the chapel steps in a village the lions had emptied. "Let the singers find that verse," he said. Some did, more did not. When the next council met, Blackwood came with a ledger of grain pledged and men mustered, Piper with a list of dead, Bracken with a map of burned fields and a mouth full of blame. Catelyn stood behind her son and listened to the drumbeat of need, need, need. Only when the tent had emptied and night pressed its cold face against the canvas did she speak. "If you cannot feed them with victories, feed them with hope," she said. "Stop their bleeding where you can. Bind their wounds in public. Let them see you do it." So Robb did something a Southern king might have done. He rode to the worst-hit villages with a wagon train of grain and healers, and he stood in the square and listened to every widow who wished to curse him. He did not argue. He promised that for every field the lions burned, he would put a man of their banners in chains. He took off his gloves to pass bread to children so they would remember the warmth of his hands when the winter came. The songs did not stop, but a few of the worst throats grew hoarse. Bolton returned at dusk one evening with no fanfare, his pale eyes soft as candle wax. "My leashes are set," he said. "Pull them when you like." Robb saw what he meant. Letters ready to be sent, favors owed, fear arranged like dry kindling. He felt the same sourness crawl up his throat as he had at Harrenhal, but he nodded anyway. He needed edges. He needed time. In the rookery that night, a raven pecked at a seed and stared at Catelyn as if it knew words shaped fate. She wrote to River Run, to the Eyrie, to White Harbor, weaving a net of sympathy and resolve. When she finished, she pressed her palm to the page as if to warm it. In the courtyard below, men rubbed their ash charms and told each other the old gods were listening. Maybe they were. Or maybe the only gods that ever listen are men with long memories and longer knives. Shadows lengthened over the riverlands. In one, a wolf stood taller than he had any right to. In another, a flayed man smiled with no teeth showing. Between them, a thin bridge waited over cold water, and on it a very old man counted his grandchildren like coins. The rain came hard, as if the sky wanted to wash the smoke from the world. Roads broke to mud, and carts sank to their axles. The men cursed and laughed in equal measure, because soldiers do both when they know the weather is their real enemy. Robb rode with his guard through fields that had been cut too early for fear of Lannister riders, the grain short and pale, like hair clipped close in shame. He counted the chimneys that no longer smoked. He made himself look. Word reached them that Lord Karstark's men had taken 2 Lannister squires in a raid near the Red Fork and were keeping them apart from other prisoners. Catelyn felt the word like a splinter in the finger. She sent for Robb without delay. In the dark of the command tent, the candles made her face look younger, which only made her worry sharper. "Watch Rickard," she said. "He is brave and loyal and broken. Broken men cut themselves and say the blade is to blame." Robb nodded, but there was always another fire to stamp. A Blackwood rider brought news of a skirmish where Bracken men accidentally rode late and left a gap that cost lives. "They will tell you it was mud and bad orders," the rider said. Maybe it was, but their banners did not pause when the lions charged. Ours did. So Robb did what he could do. He moved the Brackens to a place where their delay would shame them more than it would kill his own. He gave the Blackwoods a share of captured horses and said it was for their speed, not their loyalty, to keep pride from turning to poison. He wrote a letter to Lord Karstark with his own hand and sealed it hot. He sent a quiet man to stand near, the tent where the squires were held, not to frighten Rickard, only to remind him that his king had eyes. The Lannister songs thickened like midges in summer. A peddler's cart rolled through a village with kegs of small beer and a singer who made coins for every verse that called Robb a cold god in a fur cloak, throwing fire on poor men's roofs. Robb wanted to hang the singer and burn the cart. Instead, he sent for the man and gave him a loaf and a hard look. "Sing something true," he told him. "Sing about the lion that took a farmer's daughter and left the father in a ditch. Sing about the grain we brought here. The singer swallowed and nodded and sang soft for a while. By morning, he had slipped away. Rose Bolton's work went on like rot under bark. He sat with Robb at night and spoke in a voice that never rose. "I have a letter from a Frey nephew," he said once, turning the parchment as if he liked the feel. "He wants a place as master-at-arms somewhere north of the Neck, where the winters make men lean. He thinks he has enemies at the Twins." He smiled, a small line that never reached his eyes. "The Freys always have enemies. They breed them at supper." Robb said nothing. He could hear the shape of the thing, even if he could not see it yet. A bridge, a toll, a mouth that wanted feeding and had learned that sons and daughters filled the belly best. Catelyn rode to the outposts and spoke with small folk women who had lost more than they could name. She stood in doorways where smoke stung the eyes and held hands that were all bone and ash. More than once she found a black splinter tied at a woman's throat. "For luck," they would say. "For the boy who burned the bad place." She did not know whether to be comforted or afraid. A raven came from White Harbor with good news dressed in humble ink. Wyman Manderley had outfitted ships and sent salted fish and flour overland under heavy guard. "For the wolf who remembers winter," the letter said. Robb read it aloud at council, and men nodded and smiled and looked at their plates when the food came. Hope is a stew that fills the belly even when the meat is thin. There were battles, of course. There are always battles when maps grow crowded. Near Seven Streams, Robb met Sir Forley Prester with spears braced and bows strung, and for once the ground was kinder to the north. The Lannisters pressed and found no seam. Robb held, until their horses were lathered and their lords were angry enough to make mistakes. Then he sent a wedge through a bend in the river, where the bank rose and the reeds hid sharp stakes. The wedge broke the red line, and men with bright cloaks went into the water and did not rise. When it was done, Robb walked among the bodies and made the Septons work on the Lannister wounded same as his own. "Leave them alive to tell it," he said. "Let them carry home a different song." That night, while the camp slept, Rose Bolton sat by a low fire that made no smoke. He wrote 3 letters in a hand as neat as stitching. One went west to a minor bannerman of the Westerlings who had more pride than coin. One went south to a sellsword captain with a taste for warm beds and a need for colder steel. One went to the Twins. None of them said anything a man could hang him for. All of them said enough. Walder Frey, meanwhile, counted his grandchildren and found that number sweeter than prayer. He heard the new songs and he smiled with gums and told himself the North would come through his doors as guests or as meat. He did not care which, so long as they came hungry. Tywin Lannister shifted his pieces on the board and never looked at them twice. He sent quiet gold to noisy men and noisy orders to quiet ones. He told the bards to sing louder and the foragers to burn less. "Let the boy feed bellies," he said to a cousin whose name he did not bother to remember. "I will feed pride. Pride eats more and leaves a man hollow." He tapped the map again where the Twins sat like a gate in a narrow pass. "Tell Lord Walder I admire thrift. Tell him I remember every debt. Tell him I count well. In the AEI North." Winter teased the edges of days. Letters came slow and cold. News of Winterfell burned, reached like a hand through cloth, and touched Robb's heart until he could not breathe for a long minute. He took the letter from Catelyn's hands and read it again and again, as if the words might turn different if he stared long enough. "Theon," he said, and the name tasted of rust. Some men whispered that the burning of Harrenhal had brought a dark mirror back to the boy who had lit the fire. Catelyn did not say it, but she saw the thought in many eyes. The council that followed was a hard one. Some urged a turn north at once. Others, like Greatjon, beat the table and demanded blood west and south before winter shut the roads. Rose Bolton waited until voices were hoarse. Then, in that still voice, he offered the only road that seemed possible and terrible. "You must go to the twins," he said. "The Freys will give you men if they are honored anew. Cross with speed. Strike a blow that breaks their songs and staggers their pride. Then turn your face to the north with the Riverlands secured, and take back your home." He lifted his pale eyes to Catelyn. "Lady Stark knows Lord Walder's nature. He is a man who forgives nothing and sells everything. He will sell you passage if you make the price rich enough." Catelyn's fingers tightened on the edge of the table until her knuckles paled. She remembered a promised marriage and a broken oath. She remembered a bridge and a smirk. "He will want a wedding," she said, and the word sat between them like a knife. Robb stared at the map and saw only one thing clearly: the burned shell of Winterfell, his brothers' faces in the snow of his memory, the black plume over the god's eye that would not leave his dreams. "If a wedding is the price," he said, and his voice was steady even as his chest was not, "then we will pay a wedding, but not with honor, with caution, with eyes open." Rose inclined his head, as if patience had earned its coin. "Then, let us write to the twins." The rain stopped. The roads would harden. A bridge waited with its jaws open. The boy who burned a castle would soon walk into a hall where fires were lit for feasting. Somewhere, a singer sharpened a quill. Somewhere else, a butcher sharpened a knife. Between them stood a king who had chosen fire once and might be forced to choose it again. The twins rose from the river like two squat fists, stone knuckles bridged by ribs of timber and iron. The air smelled of wet rope, tar, and old cooking fat. Robb felt the place before he saw it, the way a man feels a tooth that's gone bad. There was a throb in the air, an ache of old grudges and unspent words. Banners hung limp in the damp, blue and silver, leaping trout and white-flayed men and gray direwolves, all of them made dull by the weather. Drums did not beat, horns did not sound. The Freys had opened their gates without ceremony, and that, more than any trumpet, felt like a warning. Catelyn rode beside her son and kept her back very straight. She had a gift for politeness that cut like a hidden blade, and she meant to use it. At the head of the bridge, a knot of Freys waited, faces narrow and long, some with Frey eyes, some with other mothers' eyes, but all with Lord Walder's thin, hungry look. Sir Ryman Frey offered stiff courtesies. Black Walder's smile had no warmth and too many teeth. Behind them, musicians held their instruments the way men hold tools in a storm, not sure whether to work or to run. They led the king's party into the East Hall first, where smoke from the great fire collected in the beams and turned the rafters black. The tables were set with trenchers and pewter cups, but no salt had been laid. Robb's jaw ticked when he saw it, a small twitch that only Catelyn noted. No salt meant no guest right yet, and that meant the Freys wished to bargain with, the feel of a noose in the room. Catelyn stepped forward before anyone else could speak, her voice warm as a hearth that still burns clean. She thanked the Freys for their welcome, praised the strength of their bridge, recalled Lord Walder's long years of service, and by the time she finished, the old man himself had been carried in on his great chair, wrapped in furs like a winter. Tick on a dog. He was smaller than Robb remembered, and somehow larger too, his spite filling the spaces flesh had left. His eyes glittered. "So the boy king comes to my poor door," he said, words creaking like steps on old wood. "The one who burns castles he can't keep and oaths he can't hold. Have you brought a bride this time, your grace, or just your mother's tears?" Abu bowed, and Catelyn watched her son swallow his pride and make it look like grace. He spoke plain. He spoke proud and careful and tired. He apologized without using that word, which was the only way apology could survive in a room like this. He offered honors and lands to sweeten the hurt that already stank like meat in summer. He promised what he could promise: protection for Frey trains on the march, fair treatment for Frey men taken for levy, a share of future spoils. He did not promise love. Love has no weight on a scale Lord Walder uses. The old man listened with his head cocked, a crow enjoying a shiny lie. "Bah," he said at last. "Words blow through this hall 10,000 times a year and none of them feed a child. But a wedding, that makes stew." He tapped the chair arm with a spotted hand. "You broke one promise, boy. You'll keep another. You will make amends with daughters and granddaughters and nieces until my roof sags with music. You will tie your wolf to my bridge with ribbons enough to drag you back when you try to run." Rose Bolton stood a pace behind Robb, still as frost, saying nothing. Catelyn could feel his attention the way one feels a spider in a room gone quiet. When she caught his eye, he lowered it in neat courtesy, and the courtesy was colder than rudeness. Guest right was finally given, salt and bread set out, the old forms satisfied with the barest crust. Men breathed easier when they tasted it. The Freys made a show of bustle then, cups filled, platters borne in, harps tuned, laughter scraped across the floor like a broom. Robb spoke with the elder sons about crossings and timetables. He kept his hands where all could see them. Catelyn visited with the women of the hall, counting Frey faces and noting who smiled with their mouths and who smiled with nothing but eyes. She found Rosalind Frey there, Rose to those who loved her, a quiet girl with small hands and a voice like morning. The girl's gentleness was as shocking in that place as a white flower in old soot. When Catelyn spoke kindly to her, Rosalind's eyes filled and she blinked them clear. "I pray for peace," the girl said. And in that moment, Catelyn wanted to beg the gods to make one soft thing true. The bargain took shape with the slow stubbornness of dough. Edmure would wed Rosalind. The North would pass swift with banners, furled and drums silent, so as not to frighten the twins' geese and gossip. Robb would honor his sworn word to keep the trident safe east and west, a promise as wide as the river and twice as hard to hold. There were feasts to mark it, smaller than pride wanted and larger than sense allowed. No man could say which side urged the cups fuller, nor why the musicians' hands trembled when they struck their first notes. Robb kept a caution as if it were armor. He set watches even within the Frey's walls, posted men in pairs, forbade strong drink to his guard. He sent Grey Wind to the yard rather than let the direwolf pad at his heels among men who stared at him as if he were a knife. It felt wrong. To him, to all of them, the wolf barred from the hall like some common cur. But wrong things sometimes save lives, and he clung to that. At night, when the hall quieted, Catelyn walked the covered bridge and listened to the water slap the pilings. She spoke softly to the dark, as if the river could carry words backward in time. She told it about Harrenhal's flames and Winterfell's, ashes and all the warmth that had fled her fingers since. As she turned to go, she found Rose Bolton standing in a pool of lamplight like a moth that had chosen stillness over flight. "My lady," he said, gentle as sleep. "A pity about the North. Smoke breeds smoke." "You think fire answers fire?" she said. "I think fire calls wolves." "Then may the wolves come at your son's back," he replied. And there was nothing to hold in those words, nothing a hand could grip to show malice. Yet her skin prickled as if she had touched iron in winter. The Freys gave them music that night thick with old steps. Girls danced, sleeves fluttering like small banners. Boys bowed, shoes whispering on rushes. Edmure tried to smile as Rosalind's hand settled in his. He had the look of a man who knew duty would be his bedfellow and hoped it would be kind. When they parted, Rosalind's eyes were red and Edmure's jaw was set. "She is good," Catelyn told him. "Be good to her. Let that goodness bind more strongly than fear." Somewhere in the hall, a singer tried a verse about the burning of Harrenhal and found Lord Walder's glance sharpening like a butcher's hook. The verse curled back into his throat and died. Different songs were wanted here, songs of bridges kept and wrongs mended, at least until the ink dried where signatures would never be written. The crossing began as dawn bled into the river. Wagons clattered, hooves rang, men breathed clouds. Frey spearmen lined the parapets like stitches. Robb rode midway down the column, where a king is safest when a river runs under him. Catelyn rode up and back, eyeing every knot of men with a mother's, counting. She saw Black Walder's thin smile and catalogued it, tucked it away with every other small blade she might one day need to name. By noon, the bulk of the army had passed to the western bank, banners lifting a little as the day warmed. Robb dismounted and knelt to press his hand to the ground as if to thank it. He spoke quietly to his captains, parceled out orders that smelled of speed. West to the Lannister roads, strike where pride is fat and guard is thin, turn again and home. He felt the shape of it take hold, a river's bend he could ride if the gods were kind just once. They feasted again that evening because men in halls do what halls ask them to do. Bread was broken, salt tasted, toasts made until the words blurred and only the sound of cups survived. Catelyn watched the musicians. She watched the doors. She watched the knives at belts, the hands that toyed with straps, the maids who came and went with jugs. Nothing happened except music and meat and the small defeats drink brings to dignity. It should have calmed her. It did not. When the fires burned low, Robb rose and thanked Lord Walder in front of them all. He praised the bridge, the bread, the bride. He named the debt he owed and vowed to pay it in safety and respect. The old man listened as if hearing a sermon about a god he did not worship. "Go then," Walder Frey said. "Go do your king's business. I'll count what you've left me, and I'll count the days. Bring me numbers I like." They left the twins at first light, the river gray and flat as hammered steel. As the bridge fell behind them, the men began to breathe as if they had been holding breath for a week. Catelyn looked back only once. On the parapet, a small figure stood, wrapped in shawls, watching. Rosalind, perhaps, or some other girl shaped like hope. Catelyn raised a hand that the girl would never see and faced west with her son. On the road beyond the Frey's shadow, ravens found them, dark knuckles beating the air. One bore Tywin's cold contempt, dressed up as courtesy. One, heavier, wore the wax of Dreadfort red. Robb broke the second first. Bolton's words were neat as ever. A Lannister host was moving from the Golden Tooth earlier than any had guessed. Supplies heavy, horses light. A chance, the letter said, to cut something vital while it was still soft. "A wound well placed bleeds twice," Rose had written. "Once in flesh, once in pride." Robb folded the letter and felt the road rise, under him like a promise. He looked to his mother, to the great lords, to the gray sky. He thought of Harrenhal and of Winterfell and of a bridge behind him that might yet ask for more than he had paid. He spoke, and his voice carried down the line like a thrown rope. They would move west, fast and quiet. They would hit hard and vanish. They would make the songs choke for breath. And then, God's willing, they would turn their faces north and find whatever truth remained in the snow. They moved like a shadow along old roads, past hedges hacked down for firewood and orchards stripped before their fruit was sweet. The men cut strips of leather from saddles to chew when the rations ran thin, and they laughed about it because laughing kept their teeth from chattering. Scouts came and went with mud up to their knees and eyes bright from seeing too much. Robb slept in a cloak that never quite dried and dreamed of towers on fire that would not fall. The Lannister host that Bolton had named turned out to be more bone than muscle. Long lines of wagons creaking under sacks of grain, barrels of wine, kegs of nails, tin plates, coils of rope. Robb found them near a bend in the road where the ground climbed and the trees pressed close. He set his trap as he'd been taught. Let the vanguard cross the small stone bridge, hold them there with shields like a door braced by shoulders, then set the middle to panic and the rear to fold. No horns, no shouts, only the slap of hooves. And the ugly music iron makes when it meets bone. It worked as plans sometimes do, not clean, but enough. The first rush took the outriders before they could blink. Hedges spat arrows, and the bridge turned slick. When men tried to turn their carts, wheels stuck fast in ruts and the air filled with curses that broke into cries. Robb rode only when the line began to stagger, gray wind loping low at his stirrup like a storm in fur. And for a moment he felt the old, clean joy of battle, the part that made sense when nothing else did. He knocked a knight from his saddle and took his reins before the man even hit the ground. He shouted for the wagons to be spared if they could, for the horses to be caught, for the drivers to be left alive. "We are not raiders," he yelled. "We are a people going home." By dusk, the road was theirs. Fires guttered in the rain. Northern lads in stolen red cloaks dragged barrels to a dry patch and broke them open with grins that looked too wide. On thin faces, Catelyn walked the line of prisoner carts and spoke quietly to each man. "You are not meat," she told them. "You are ransom, or a letter, or a debt someone will count. Breathe." Some wept, some spat. She took both as proof they were still human. They found letters in a captain's chest, neatly tied with blue string. Reports and orders, lists of names and weights, the syntax of war. One sheet, creased and greasy at the edges, held a song copied by a practiced hand. It told of a boy king and his fire, and ended with a verse about a mother who prayed to trees and got only char in answer. Catelyn read it all and did not look at her son until she had folded it twice and put it back where it had come from. "They are learning to dress their blades in poetry," she said. "Cut the same, bleed the same." That night, Rickard Karstark came to the king's fire with rain in his beard and something too sharp in his eyes. "The squires," he said without preamble. "The Lannister whelps we took near the Red Fork. They laughed when they heard about Winterfell." The name hung there like a bell. Men stopped speaking around them. They said boys burned as easy as that castle you lit. "Where are they?" Robb asked, a dread he knew too well beginning to uncurl in his belly. "In a tent," Karstark said. "Not for long if the gods are just." Catelyn moved first, faster than men expected a lady to move. "You will not," she said, and her voice cut through the wet air like a whip. "Not while you wear my son's colors." Karstark's mouth twisted. "Your son's colors?" He tapped the direwolf stitched at his breast. "My son's blood. My lord's mercy. 2 sons for a king's broken oath and a castle's pretty fire. What do we keep if we keep nothing?" "We keep being different from what we hate," Robb said. "Bring the boys to me. Now." They came with wrists bound. 2 pale lads in Lannister crimson that looked foolish on them, eyes red from crying they tried to hide. One whispered, "Please," and the other whispered nothing at all. Robb saw not lions but children wearing their father's sins like ill-fitting mail. He remembered Bran small as a sparrow trying to lift a practice sword that kept tipping forward. He swallowed hard and turned to Karstark. "You will stand down," he said. "You will sit in your tent and count the hours until they heal you, or break you, but you will not touch them." Karstark's hands clenched. "Heal?" he said, soft with disbelief. "There is no healing. There is only the cut we take now or the cut we take later." Catelyn stepped closer. "You loved your sons. I loved mine. If love doesn't hold our hands, rage will lead us around by the nose like pigs. Is that all we are now? Pigs in fine cloaks?" For a heartbeat, something in Karstark's face faltered. Then it hardened again. "You burned a castle, my lady," he said. "You will not teach me mercy in the ashes. See in the ashes." They chained him. It took 10 men because he did not fight with fists. He fought with his stare. They put him under guard, and Robb knew exactly what next day would bring because he had been counting down to this law since the moment he'd heard about the squires. When dawn came, gray and mean, they raised a block in a makeshift square and set men to hold back a crowd that did not want to watch and did not want to look away. Robb read the words of doom in a voice that did not tremble. He said them because, if he did not, then all the other words he had said since he'd been named king would turn to mush in every mouth that repeated them. Karstark knelt without kneeling. If such a thing is possible, his pride tall even as his neck bent. "The gods judge us both," he said, calm as a cold river. "One for sons, one for oaths." Robb swung the sword himself because that was the Stark way. When the blade bit, men flinched, and Catelyn closed her eyes as if someone had thrown sand. The head thumped into wet straw and rolled until it touched the post and stopped, staring at nothing. Before dusk, the Karstark men were gone. Some slipped like foxes, some marched like men who wanted to be seen leaving. Either way, the host was smaller when the sun set. Robb stood by the empty ground where their tents had been and tasted the loss like iron. "I kept the law," he said to no one in particular, as if he needed to hear it aloud. "You did," Catelyn said, and put a hand on his arm. "The law is a rope. It holds a tent up. It can also hang a man." Word of the execution ran ahead of them, as all hard things do. In inns where men played at kings with cups and crumbs, they used the boy with the fire for kindling in their tales. In castles where ravens nested, maesters underlined the lines about order and fear with neat, dry strokes. Tywin read and smiled a fraction. "The wolf trims his own fur," he said. "Good." Rose Bolton said very little. He ate neatly, wrote neatly, and inquired after the health of men whose names he never once stumbled over. When Robb asked him how the West would answer this blow, Bolton offered possibilities that were all plausible and all bloodless. "A host will come heavy," he said. "It will move like a fat man on a cold morning. If we are still quick, we can make him sweat and never see our backs. If we are slow..." He let the word rot in the air. "Speed is a kindness we give ourselves." Letters from the north clawed their way through rain and distance. Some said Bran and Rickon were dead, hanging like meat from Winterfell's walls. Some said they had run into the Wolf's Wood and become wolves. Some said Theon wept and boasted in turns. All of them hurt. Robb carried them like stones in his pockets. When he slept, he dreamed of boys with soot on their faces who would not tell him if they were cold. They struck again before the West could gather. A storehouse near Ashmark, a convoy on a back road, a toll station where a petty lord had grown, fat on frightened merchants. Each time, Robb left more of the enemy breathing than not and took more food than glory. Each time, the men looked a little thinner, and the wolf's talismans a little darker from the grease of fingers. Each time, he could feel the rope of law around his own throat, the weight of Harrenhal's fire on his shoulders, the eyes of a hall he had left behind counting and counting and counting. On the 5th night after Karstark's death, rain eased and a wind came from the west smelling of iron and wet stone. In the distance, thunder rolled like carts on a bridge. Catelyn stood beside her son and listened. "That's an answer," she said. "Not a storm." Robb nodded. He could feel men moving in that sound, pride gathering itself up with grain and courage, banners drying in hearth smoke, a father who did not forgive, and a bridge you had to cross twice. He looked to Bolton and found the flayed man already, watching him, patient as a winter sunrise. "We move before they do," Robb said. "We make them chase shadows. We leave them hungry where we can." "And the north?" Catelyn asked. He closed his eyes and saw snow. "We will earn it back," he said, "or it will bury us." That night, the dreams changed. The towers still burned, but when they cracked and fell, the stones did not hit the ground. They hung in the air over black water, waiting for a hand to decide whether to drop them or stack them into some new shape. He woke with his heart thudding and the taste of ash in his mouth, and for the first time since Harrenhal, he was not sure whether the fire behind him had warned him or dared him. The wind from the west did not bring rain the next day. It brought dust and a smell like old blood. Scouts came back in pairs with their mouths set hard, and the map on Robb's table began to fill with small stones and short sticks in patterns that looked like a child's game until you remembered each piece stood for men. A Lannister host was marching out from the Golden Tooth and Oxcross both, not fast but steady, pulling behind them the stubborn weight of wagons and the softer weight of pride. "Two fists," the Blackfish said, tapping the stones. "Trying to clap us flat." Robb listened, his thumb walking the edge of his father's map as if the leather could teach him calm. "They want our backs to a river," he said, "so we will put their feet in the mud first." He chose ground with the same stubborn care he used for words. Low ridges like sleeping boars, copses tight enough to hide a man and a wolf, a stream that cut the plain like a thin mouth. "We'll show them teeth and give them stones," he said. "When their line stretches, the teeth will close." Roose Bolton offered to hold the center. He said it mildly, almost apologetic, as if volunteering. For the place where men die most was rudeness. "Your Grace, your van is your name," he said. "Let me be the cloth stretched tight. You be the needle." His eyes were as calm as milk left out in winter. Catelyn did not like the offer or the image. Cloth tears, needles break. Still, Robb nodded. "You'll hold," he said. "And when I break their flank, you'll push and make the break a wound." Roose bowed that neat little bow of his and moved his stones with tidy fingers. That night, the men ate poor stew and better news. Word had come from White Harbor of another convoy, salted fish and hard bread, even a cask of honey as if the sea had grown generous. The cheer that followed wasn't loud. It was deep, like a house's timbers answering a wind. They passed the honey by the spoon to boys with hollow cheeks and old men who had lost their molars to bad winters. Someone sang a northern cradle song, without the cradle, and the men listened the way hungry dogs listen to a knife on a whetstone. Catelyn walked the lines with the Blackfish and watched boys rub their ash-blackened charms between finger and thumb. She saw Grey Wind move like a shadow at the edge of the firelight, nose high, the hair along his back a little raised. "He's tasted too much man blood," the Blackfish said, not unkindly. "Wolves don't forget." "Neither do mothers," Catelyn said. She remembered the covered bridge at the Twins, and the way Salt had come late to that table. She remembered Roslyn's wet eyes and Walder's dry smile. Memory can be a ladder or a trap. Tonight, it felt like both. Near midnight, a rider came from the east, a fray under a plain cloak, mud to his thighs, blue lips from the cold. He asked for Lord Bolton, not the king, and that made the hair at Catelyn's nape prickle. She watched the man be led to Rose's tent and watched him leave again, by a different way, quieter than he had come. She said nothing until morning, and even then she said it sideways. "Lord Bolton," she asked over porridge, "do the Freys carry news of trout and debts to you now?" "They carry news to anyone who treats news like coin," Rose said. "I pay fairly. That is all." He ate one spoonful, set the bowl down, and folded his hands. "They say Lord Tywin counts days and grandchildren and insults with equal care. They say he means to make a number of us into a lesson. A pity for those who cannot count." Catelyn met his eyes and saw nothing there but a reflection of her own face, small and tired. "A pity," she agreed. "For those who cannot count." At dawn, the Lannisters came into view, a smear of color on the far rise, banners like tongues. Their horns sounded like boasts. Robb's horns answered like promises. Men moved to places they had dug and measured and memorized until the ground felt like a friend with 2 hands and a hard back. The first clash was ugly and short. Red cloaks, breaking on a tangle of pikes and stakes, horses screaming, a boy from Barrowton sobbing as he tried to free his spear from a man who would not let it go. Then the next wave came, heavier, and the shouting turned to grunts, then to that low, steady sound men make when they mean to live. Robb rode the left with a wedge of riders whose saddles had more stitches than leather left. He kept them close, until the moment their breath went sharp together, and then he gave the word, and they slid like a knife into the place where the Lannister line had wrinkled. Grey Wind went first because that is what wolves do, and men followed because that is what men do when they think a god in fur is on their side. They broke a troop of spears, took a captain, turned a red banner sideways, and for a heartbeat the whole field seemed to tilt toward them. Robb could feel the promise of it, the shape of a story where he wins by being faster and kinder and harder at the right times. In the center, Bolton's men held as promised, pale leathers dark with sweat, shields locked. Roose himself sat his horse with that bloodless calm, giving small signs with 2 fingers, almost dainty. When a pocket opened, he filled it. When a push faltered, he bled a little from one spot to feed another. It was cold, clean soldiering, and Catelyn hated that she admired it. Then a horn blew from the far right, 2 short notes, 1 long, and men near the stream began to fall back too fast. Not rout, not yet, but something like it wearing a neat face. A gap showed itself, thin as a smile. Catelyn saw it first because mothers know the shape of trouble in a child's mouth. "There," she said to the blackfish, and her finger shook. "There." Robb saw it a breath later. He turned his horse and shouted for the reserve he had kept like a secret under his cloak. They came, a dark snake of men with shields high, and slid into the gap before it could become a wound. The line held again, ugly and stubborn. A boy from White Harbor fell, and a man from the Dreadfort took his place without even looking down. "Well," Rose murmured when word reached him, "speed is a kindness." By afternoon, the Lannister push had flattened into something like a stalemate. With teeth, Robb had taken their left and blooded their pride. They had crushed his wings twice and found only more men behind. When the sun tipped west, both sides began to pull back with a care that looked like grace if you squinted. The field stank of iron and wet wool. Flies came early. They counted, as men always do after a battle that ends in breath. The numbers were not kind, but they were not a ruin. Robb had wagons still and most of his horses. He had captains who could stand and speak, and boys who could smile when they saw bread. He had a letter, too, slipped into his hand with the evening bread by a man in Frey Grey who did not meet his eyes. The seal was a smear, broken in haste. Inside, a small hand had written in a round, careful script. Lord Edmure is kind. The hall is loud. Lord Walder counts. I am with child. No signature, no plea, nothing a man could hold like a cudgel. Just that soft truth laid down like a flower on a stone. Catelyn read it twice and pressed it back into her son's palm. Walder won't break bread with you while he thinks he can break something else, she said. But he has tied a thread to our house now. Threads pull. Robb stared at the words until they blurred. He thought of the bridge and the salt, and the old man's eyes. He thought of Harrenhal black in the night, and of Winterfell black in the day. He thought of the men who had left him, and the men who had not. We turn north after one more cut, he said finally, voice low. We make the lions limp and we go. I won't give Tywin the fight he wants on his ground. I won't give Walder more nights to count. Rose Bolton listened and nodded as if the decision had been his own idea, and a small one at that. As you say, he said, a final kindness for the West, then the long road. That night the camp lay quiet, a tired animal that had found a patch of grass, and meant to keep it. Catelyn walked past sleeping men and tethered horses and a wolf who watched her with eyes that remembered the forest better than tents. She stopped when she saw a man from the Dreadfort kneeling by a stream, washing a knife with a care that felt like prayer. "Hard day," she said. He looked up with a polite half-smile that did not touch his eyes. "Hard," he agreed. "But clean. The worst is the messy kind." When she lay down, she dreamed of water under a bridge, black and slow, and something moving just under the surface, keeping pace with her no matter how fast she walked. In the morning, the dream clung to her like damp linen. She told no one. Some fears gain weight when shared. Before dawn, a raven came from River Run with ink barely dry. Lannister riders sighted near the Tumblestone, light and fast and carrying casks instead of spears. "Wine for the Piper's Hall," the maester had added in a crabbed hand and then crossed it out with one thin line. Catelyn stared at that line a long time. Crossing out is not the same as taking back. Robb gave the order for the last strike, quick as a pinch, and after that they would break away and make for the neck, for Moat Cailin, for the long, cold road that could kill a man with mercy if he knew how to walk it. He felt leaner, older, more made of edges than he had ever wanted to be. As the sun pulled itself up on a weak rope of light, he touched the ash charm a soldier had pressed into his hand weeks ago, a splinter of Harrenhal bound in leather. It was smooth now from his thumb's worry. He held it, and for the first time, since he had set that castle alight, he wondered if the fire he'd lit had followed him like a dog, patient, waiting for the whistle that would tell it when to bite. They hit the riders near a stand of old oaks where the road dipped and the ditches were deep enough to hide a horse. The casks slung across the Lannister mules thumped like sleeping men, and the guards were loose with the confidence of men sent to deliver comfort, not steel. Robb let them pass the first bend, then closed the mouth of the road with thorn and spear and calm, practiced hands. It was quick and it wasn't pretty. The first volley dropped the three loudest, and the rest went to their knees with hands up and eyes wide, the way men do when they realize they have been living inside a story that wasn't theirs to end. When they split the casks, a sweet smell rushed out and caught in the throat. Not wine. Honeyed brandy, the sort that loosens tongues and lowers guard. In a packet under the wagon seat, Catelyn found letters with oily edges and careful hand. Promises to small lords along the Tumblestone for a season's grain in exchange for temperate obedience, an elegant phrase for standing aside when a banner came. A list of names had been tucked inside, men who were tired, men who had debts, men who dreamed too much of soft beds. Robb read them, jaw tight. "Pride does eat more than bread," he said. "Tywin's right about that at least." He took every letter and every cask and sent the prisoners home with shoes and shame and a message to carry. The wolf does not drink what he does not pour. By dusk, they were already turning their faces toward the neck. The men didn't cheer. They breathed, long, low breaths like men who had been bracing for a blow and felt it pass an inch from their teeth. The Blackfish rode at Robb's side and counted quietly, the way a soldier counts wagons and wounds and the hours of light left in a day. Catelyn watched the road behind them as much as the road ahead, because danger wears both faces when bridges lie between. Rose Bolton rode neat and silent, a ghost who had remembered to bring a horse. When Robb laid out the plan, Mallister, scouts to screen the western flank, Crannogmen to guide them through the causeways, no feasts, no pauses, the twins avoided like a snarling dog. Rose merely inclined his head. "Sigurd's lord has a good nose," he said. "Follow it. I will take the rear and sweep what falls from your table." They did not go back to the twins. They crossed by ferries near Oldstones, where the river narrowed like a belt. The Mallisters lent them boats, lean and quick, their oarsmen cutting water with the same plain grace they used on bread. Oldstones looked like a memory that had given up, tumbled stone and nettles, a high broken throne that stared toward a past no one living had seen. Catelyn stood there as men loaded and unloaded and thought of Jenny's song, and for a moment wished the South had fewer ghosts and more straight roads. When the last boat nosed the northern bank, Robb stood ankle-deep in mud and spoke low so only those nearest could hear. "We are done with their halls," he said. "If we eat in the open. If we sleep with spears near. We owe thanks, but not our throats. Ravens found them anyway, like old debts." Wyman Manderley's hand came again, heavy and sure. Ships to Barrowton, salt beef, flour, 3 casks of lamp oil, as if he meant to feed not only men, but beacons. "For the boy who lit a fire the gods noticed," one line read, and Robb folded that one without comment. From Deepwood Mott, word that the Ironborn were gnawing on the coasts like rats on rope. From the Crannigs, a reed-bound scrap that smelled of mud and mint. The causeways were watched and the water was hungry. "Follow us, or you will feed her," it said. They took the green road north of Seaguard that wasn't green anymore, just ruts and stubborn weeds like old men's hair. The air changed, weight shifting from rain to damp, to that heavy, living smell the neck keeps like a secret. Trees drew closer without moving. Frogs sang. Midges loved every soft bit of skin they could find. The men who had marched through lion country called the bogs worse, and then made themselves stop complaining because nothing that steals your boots and your breath should hear its own name too often. Crannig men glided out of the rushes like thoughts you almost catch and then don't. Short, quiet, eyes like moss. They spoke to Catelyn with respect, and to Robb like kin, and to Rose Bolton not at all. And if Rose noticed, his face didn't say so. At the first causeway stone, Robb called his captains. "No banners," he said. "These paths don't care for bright cloth, no horns. We move at their pace." He glanced at Grey Wind, who had lifted his head and was tasting the air with careful disdain. "The wolves follow the reeds," he added, and the men laughed because wolves don't take orders. But something in the laugh was grateful, too. Rose asked for the rear again, and Robb granted it, because the rear is where men vanish, and he wanted Bolton where he could see him. "The bogs will take stragglers," Rose said lightly. "I prefer not to argue with mud." Somewhere on the second day, with water at ankle height and patience lower, a shout went up at the back and then stopped too fast. Robb turned and would have spurred, but a Crannig man laid a hand on his boot with the calm that comes from living where panic kills. "A man went down," he said. "He did not come up. The ground in that place is not ground." Robb looked to Rose, who had already sent men with poles and ropes and faces like stone. They stood. They probed. They found no man, only bubbles and a slow burp of black water like a foul laugh. When they came back, Roos's mouth made the shape of a regret, and his eyes did not. "Unlucky," he said. "The neck is hungry." Catelyn studied the men around him and counted which faces were Dreadfort pale and which were not. Numbers matter when counting becomes all you have. They reached Moat Cailín at dusk of the 4th day. Though reaching a ruin is a strange word for dragging yourself to a row of broken giants sleeping in the mud. Towers like rotten teeth, walls like ribs, crows drawing maps in the air. The sight of it made men square their shoulders because the bones were theirs, and even death that belongs to you can stiffen a spine. The Crannigmen had already been and made mischief. Pitfalls for iron-born patrols, night noises to spook tired sentries, a log dragged to sound like many feet. It wasn't a siege so much as a long, mean conversation where the wind said most of the words. Robb didn't waste men on glory. He let the little folk lead them along paths that weren't there, sent lads with quiet hands to cut ropes and set ladders, waited for rain on the second night and moved under it the way a wolf moves in a thicket. By dawn, the third morning, a horn in the west tower called men who weren't coming, and a flag in the east sagged and slid. A Greyjoy captain cursed and threw his sword in the mud, and that was the bravest thing he'd done that week. Robb took his surrender and his oath to leave by water and not come back, and he meant to keep both promises for him. He wanted his men alive more than he wanted a boast. When the gate that still worked creaked, something tight in Catelyn's chest finally loosened. She put her palm to the old stone and felt a chill that wasn't unfriendly. In the square that wasn't quite a square, under a tree that had fought its way up through rock and won, Robb knelt. He took the ash charm from his neck, the splinter from Harrenhal he had worried smooth with a thumb, and held it a moment. "I brought fire south," he said, not loud but not whispering. "It gave me something and took too much. I give it back now to a place that belongs to us." He buried the splinter at the tree's roots and pressed the wet earth flat with his palm. A boy who had been at Harrenhal watched with his mouth open, then closed it and nodded once, as if a weight he hadn't had words for found a place to set down. They lit small fires that night, careful ones that smelled of peat and fish and home instead of pitch and screams. Men ate slow and no one sang. The sound of frogs and far birds filled the spaces words would have filled in a hall. Rose Bolton stood at the edge of the light, hands folded behind him, face as gentle as you please. When Robb told him the next steps, Barrowton for stores, White Harbor for ships, Winterfell by road and marsh and prayer, Rose bowed that neat bow. "As you say," he said, "I will ride east and make certain the trident does not swell with lions while your back is turned. We cannot have our house flooded while we mend the roof." Robb looked at him for a long time and nodded, because a king must sometimes nod to a feeling he does not like. "Send word," he said. "Often." Rose smiled by moving nothing but air. Of course. In the morning, Bolton was gone with a tale of pale men and mules that did not bray. The space he left felt cleaner, which is a strange thing to feel about a man who has kept your center from breaking twice. Catelyn watched the bog mist swallow him and did not pretend relief was trust. "He will come back if it suits him," she said. "He will not if it doesn't." Robb did not answer. He was looking north. They moved again, but it was a different kind of march. The land rose by inches and the air dried slow. The men's voices changed, lower without them meaning to lower them, as if the north reached into their throats and tuned them. Scouts came in with tales of burned crofts and empty steads, of iron-borne tracks and the odd wolf larger than memory. There were cairns where no cairns had been, stones piled with care by hands that remembered names. Under one they found a scrap, of gray wool and a ribbon of blue, the colors of houses that had not knelt to lions. Robb set his hand on the cairn and closed his eyes. "I am coming," he said, "for the dead and for the living and for a house that needed its doors fixed and its fires relit." On the last night before Barrowton, the sky went clear as glass and the stars were so many it felt like a lie told by a god with too much time. Gray wind lifted his muzzle and howled, not wild and not tame, and from far off other voices answered, thin with distance, thick with life. Men who had seen Harrenhal burn and Winterfell blacken and a bridge's shadow stretch over their sleep sat their watches with their backs a little straighter. Catelyn lay with her cloak over her and her hand under her cheek, a mother between hard ground and cold air, and let herself think one soft thought, that a boy who had lit a terrible fire had learned how to bank it, to carry its warmth in a small, guarded way without letting it run the table. In the morning, they would ride to a town that still baked bread and said the old words when a stranger came. After that, they would move on Winterfell, and there would be iron, and there would be blood, and there would be choices that hurt. The songs might not be kind. The numbers might not be either. But the North took back what it could, and what it could not, it remembered. Smoke rose from their little fires and drifted toward a sky that had seen every oath men ever broke. It spread thin and lost itself among the stars, and for once the smoke did not look like a banner or a curse. It looked like breath on a cold morning, proof that something still living meant to keep going.